we actually in our home decided to do no screens from Monday to Friday, and we've done that for quite some time. Noticed huge changes in him and his creativity and just his demeanor, calmness, all of it.
Welcome to the Health Tech Up. I'm your host, Lisa Chang, and this is a place where we are checking up on how you are doing with your understanding of technology, and whether that's helping your overall health or whether that's hindering your health. Well, parents, listen up, because this episode is for you. Today, we are going to do a deep dive in how you are parenting in this digital world. How are you doing with that? I think the big question is there a right answer? Are we setting up our children to thrive in this technological age? Well, I know that's a big, meaty topic, and that comes with heavy questions, but simple answers. And to give us those answers, yes, we have all the help with us today. Joining me, I am so pleased to introduce her, is Dr. Alison Yeung. If this is the first time you're hearing of Dr. Alison Yeung, well, let me tell you, she comes with a stacked resume. She is a highly respected family physician with a special interest in child and adolescent mental health. We all need that. She's here to help families navigate technology use in healthy and balanced ways. And today, we're going to find out from her how parents can set realistic, age-appropriate boundaries without having to go to war at home. This sounds like a dream. We're also going to talk about how screens are impacting our children's brains, behavior, and social development. Alison, thank you so much for being here today. What I want to ask you right out the gate is, why did you align yourself to this work, and why are you so passionate about it?
Yeah, so I feel like I honestly just stumbled into this work. I have a practice in the community in Kitchener, and I've been working for over a decade now. And what I've noticed in my time in practice is that there's been a trend towards more adolescents, more kids coming in with mental health problems that just started to seem different than they used to be. They were coming in with more severe presentations, a lot more sadness, anxiety, thoughts of wanting to hurt themselves, lots of problems with motivation, all these different things. And I was finding that as we would try to treat them, so that may be with some counseling, they may meet criteria for certain diagnoses, and we put them on medication. And when they would come back to me, they wouldn't get any better. Okay, so what do we do next? So we might change medications, try something different. And I found that they kept coming back and they weren't getting better, and I couldn't pinpoint why this would happen. And I guess over time, learning about technology and social media and the way that we use it as consumers was not anything that I learned about in medical school. Obviously, this wasn't a thing back in 2010, really. And so I started to ask questions, and I think dive a little bit deeper into the questions that I was just asking on a very superficial level. And when we would talk about their screen time, or I would say, what do you do for your spare time? What do you do when you get home from school? And they would say, not much. I go on YouTube, or I play video games. I go on social media. And I kept getting the same answers from all of these kids time and time again. And we'd look at their screen time together, and it was, often 5+ hours a day on the phone. And so that's when I went into the research and really did a deep dive there and realized, wow, there is a lot of data here to suggest that this is a problem.
Yeah.
And this is affecting adolescents. And at the time, I started talking about this about 2 years ago, and I couldn't find a lot of people, honestly, who were talking about it in a big, meaningful way. And I was like, I feel like more people need to be talking about this. So I just started, ironically, an Instagram page, because I'm like, how do I reach parents? And just started talking about my thoughts, posting some studies that would come out and things like that. And it's really just snowballed from there and become such a passion project for me, because I think I've also realized the way that some of these big tech corporations are targeting our children, and what a challenge that is for parents.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm here.
You know, you said a couple of key things there, and I really want to highlight the word consumption that you used when it comes to taking in our technology. I think that is really, really important to look at it that way because, you know, we consume a lot of things. We consume food, we consume beverages, we consume a lot.
Yeah.
But when we look at technology, we also have to see it that way. So I want to talk about different age groups for a second because I know that you specialize with, you know, child and adolescent age groups specifically.
Yeah.
However, I want to know what the data is saying for all age groups as it relates to technology. You know, you mentioned that you're seeing it sort of develop year over year, but what are you really seeing when it comes to the data? And how quickly did that develop as well?
So I guess I think about the blanket of the time that kids, adolescents, teens are spending on digital media. And then you can think about the content. So a little bit separate. If we think about the time that kids are spending on media, it varies by age. So under 2 years of age, they're spending about an hour a day. Between 2 and 8, they're spending anywhere from an average of 2 to 3.5 hours a day. And then tweens are spending 5 to 6 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And we're talking non-entertainment screens. So this is outside of school. When we get to teens and young adults, we're talking 5 to 9 hours a day. So
wow.
It's a huge amount of time, and multiple studies have replicated these numbers. And so we have to be thinking about the ways, I mean, if you've got a kid in school and then they're also spending 5 to 6 hours a day on technology, they're not doing much else.
Right.
Right? So what's happening and what we're seeing in the trends is that it's displacing these other pillars of development that we know are very helpful and necessary for kids. So whether that's time outdoors, physical activity, time with loved ones in person, like they're probably not hanging out with mom and dad very much in that time. And in a lot of times it's digging into their sleep because it's just that many hours.
So those are the main pillars. And I know that, you know, as we move along in this conversation, we're not only going to look at the kids and their tech usage, but we're also going to look at the adults and their tech usage 100%. And how that all comes together under one roof.
Yep.
But, you know, I want to talk about the common issues next that you're seeing.
Yeah.
You mentioned it in the beginning, but could you get into a bit more detail with all of those hours that you just mentioned? Do they correlate to common issues that you're seeing in your practice?
Yeah. So, and not on the surface. So it's interesting because nobody's ever come to my office, not a child, not a parent, and said, we want to see you because we're having a problem with technology. Maybe that's happened one time. They'll come in with something else, right? So the things that kids are presenting to me with are most often anxiety, depression, problems focusing at school and having the motivation to complete schoolwork.
That's a big one.
A big one. I'm seeing a lot more actual school refusal or school avoidance, and problems with sleep, which is not typically a problem that you would see a child have because kids love to sleep and they sleep for long periods of time. So most kids are not getting the amount of sleep that they need. And then there's like these intangibles that come in where kids just come in and they really have no self-confidence. You know, they hate themselves. Yeah.
Wow.
And that's really hard to see. So really, really struggling with self-confidence, really struggling with loneliness. Like I think a real lack of in-person peer connections.
Yeah.
And when we try to make the connection to the phone, you know, there have been a number of times where I'll go back with the parent and I will say, okay, you know, Susie's been in to see me for a number of months now. Like, when did she get a smartphone? When did she get onto social media? And I can't tell you the number of times when we've backtracked and found they got the phone and anywhere within like 6 to 12 months, they're in to see me.
Wow.
And so not that proves anything.
Right.
But I think it's a really important correlation to be noticing.
For sure. And what I'm the most curious about is, are these kids and adolescents and teens, are they coming into your office already knowing what the problem is, or they just feel off and so they're there to see you and it's up to you to diagnose that?
Yeah, more often than not, they're coming in and they don't know why they feel the way they feel. They can put a label on it to say, I feel anxious, or I feel sad, or like I'm just having a lot of trouble getting my schoolwork done and I don't know why. But most often they really have no idea why. And I'll say why, and why is that? And they're like, I don't know. So I think particularly, and I like to draw this distinction between younger adolescents and sort of older teens and young adults, because I find I have very different conversations with those two cohorts of kids when we talk about screens specifically. So the younger teens really don't have much insight into the way that technology may be impacting how they feel.
Yes.
Whereas once they're 18, 19, 20, it's an entirely different conversation where they really can look back and say, like, that technology messed me up. It affected me. And it's great to see, like, they're growing up, their frontal lobe is developing, and so they just do have more of that insight. But it can be challenging with the younger kids to make changes because they don't see it.
For sure. And I think, as somebody who is an expert in the tech field as well, if there's one thing that I can say is I feel hopeful, because there are more conversations like this happening. Yeah. And I feel like, young generations, they are becoming a lot more mindful of how much they are actually consuming and what they are consuming. And they're also very connected to how they're feeling. And parents as well, from an education perspective, they're also opening up their minds to understanding tech usage in a bigger way and how that's affecting not only themselves, even as adults, I think we struggle,
100%,
but more so how it's affecting their kids and the overall family. So let's get into that. Let's stay on the topic of hope for a second.
Yeah.
I think there's, it's really important to distinguish between, good tech use and good tech consumption, and bad tech use and bad tech consumption. And is there such a thing?
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a challenging question to answer because there's so much nuance and every kid is different. So what may be particularly harmful for one child is kind of okay for another child. So what I would say, number one, is like really know your child. And I think a lot of times when we pay attention to what our child looks like, feels like, is acting like during tech, after tech, we can get a lot of hints about how that might be affecting them. I think that there are better and worse ways to use technology, and I can go over a few of those. One of the things I like to talk about is the size of the screen that we're watching. So I prefer, when possible, I think kids should be watching on bigger screens.
So a TV.
A TV on the wall, preferentially over an iPad, over a smartphone. And the reason for that is because the smaller the screen gets, typically there's a touch screen involved. So it's a lot more engaging. And it's also more isolating. Yeah, it's also more isolating. So, if we think about an hour spent with you and your son and your husband watching a movie on a big TV versus an hour of a child in their room with the headphones on, going on the iPad, that's an hour of screen time, but it's a completely different experience for that child.
So as parents, what should we be looking out for? You mentioned look for the signs. What are those signs?
Yeah.
If they have an hour of, let's say, that headphone on locked into the screen time, are there, I guess, signs that we should be looking for after that?
Yeah, so sometimes I would say it's normal after, because they're going to be getting all kinds of dopamine on that screen, cortisol maybe if they're playing a game and it's a little bit stressful. And so when that screen is taken away, it's natural for those levels of dopamine to fall. And that is going to create a craving and possibly a little bit of behavioral dysregulation. So I think parents need to know some of this is normal and fine, and we just sort of weather the storm. And I know it's hard to come off and all of that stuff. But if we're finding that maybe those irritable feelings are continuing throughout the day beyond the sort of 10 to 15 minutes that maybe it takes to come down off of a screen, or our child is constantly asking for the screen, if they seem unengaged with other activities that are not a screen. Or even you say like, we're going to go out and go for a hike. And they're like, okay, because I have to. But the whole time they're out for the hike, like, but when we go home, I'm going to go back. Like just sort of that preoccupation with the screen. To me, that's saying that maybe that amount of screen or the type of screen that they're getting right now is a little bit much for them to regulate.
Yeah.
And so maybe pulling back a little bit could be helpful. And it's always like trial and error, and you're going back and you're tweaking things and trying to find what's best for your kid.
So I think the big juicy question with that one is, how do we have conversations around that? Let's say those are signs that we're noticing. I can say with my son, I constantly see him, wanting to go back to the screen, even though there are multiple activities that are set up in the house. And we're constantly teaching, the concept of balance in our home. He just always wants to go back.
Yeah.
How do we have those conversations if we're noticing that addictive behavior with different age groups?
Yeah, so I'll go over like a bit of a framework maybe, and then give an example. Of course, it has to be age appropriate to your child. So
For sure.
I have these 4 C's that I say that you can kind of run through. So the first one would be communicate. So I think the adults of the family need to get together, communicate what they're noticing, what they're worried about, get on the same page about what the goal might be or what changes they think you need to see. And then you bring the child into the conversation and you collaborate. So now it's having that conversation with your kid to say, we maybe didn't know at the time how YouTube Shorts or whatever it is was going to affect your brain. And we're noticing these changes and it's a bit concerning. We want to keep you safe. We want to talk about how we might be able to change a few things in the house. And then you've got to hear them out, validate their feelings, because they're going to have some valid feelings for sure.
Yeah.
And then the next C is compromise. So I think where we can compromise with our kids is really important in terms of like getting their buy-in. There's always going to be kids who are like rule followers and they're like, yes, mom, no problem. That's fine.
Yes.
But then there's also going to be kids like mine who are boundary pushers and they want to know why and they don't understand. And so I think if there's a way to, that's the next C, like reach common ground on a change. And so maybe you want X, Y, Z change, but right now you decide you're just going to do X and see how it goes. And then do that for a week or two, circle back, and then start again and see how it's going. So as an example, in our house, when my son was younger, he would use the iPad sometimes. And we quickly learned that for his brain, it was so overstimulating.
Yes.
The behaviors became very out of control very quickly, even with not a lot of use. And we just felt that at this age, he cannot regulate his use. And we think it would be better to just have that gone altogether.
Could I just interrupt you there?
Yeah.
And just ask you, if you don't mind sharing with us, what did you start noticing in him? And how quickly did you action that and manage it?
Yeah, so this was probably when he was about 4. We would notice just huge tantrums when the screen had to end.
Wow.
Lengthy tantrums that were sometimes, there was hitting and there was kicking and crying, and they just last so long. And so we actually in our home decided to do no screens from Monday to Friday. And we've done that for quite some time. Noticed huge changes in him and his creativity and just his demeanor, calmness, all of it. Because honestly, since I've started to talk about this topic, like I've personally learned so much. I was the parent who was giving my 2-year-old an iPad. You know what I mean? You don't know what you don't know.
Very much relate.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's exactly why the education piece is so important. But as time has gone on, when he's grown up a bit more, we may watch a little bit of the Jays game together at night, and that may be okay. And so for us, less is more, for sure, for his temperament.
Yeah.
But knowing your kid is so important.
I completely agree. And I think that when you just sort of put the screen there and it's a free-for-all, that's where the dangers sort of present themselves.
Yeah.
But in our case, and I think that a lot of parents might relate to this, you might be one of them, a lot of our kids were conditioned to be on the screen during COVID and lockdown years.
Yeah.
And so some of us, I think, are still dealing with the impact of that because they just automatically became very reliant and used to being in front of a laptop or a television or, you know, a tablet or all of them at the same time.
Yeah.
That was the way that they entertained and the way that they educated themselves. In my house, the thing that we have done is we've sort of, you know, taught the difference between that bad screen usage and good screen usage. So, okay, we're going to stop consuming all of this mindless content, but we're going to download apps to be creative.
Yeah.
So, for example, Procreate is a great one where my son is learning how to draw on
open-ended.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So being creative or, you know, getting really interested in a topic and using YouTube to further research that topic. Or to your point, having a full-blown movie night or a game night even where we're using apps or something like that on the bigger screen. But I think the thing that I noticed the most about my son is that the minute that it becomes full-on engagement between myself, my husband, and him, he is game. So I want to talk about that for a second because I think a lot of times, you know, parents, especially the ones who are busy and they're overwhelmed, they are relying on screen usage to occupy their kids, but we're also occupying ourselves in a separate way with also consuming mindless content. What would you say the correlation is between how we are presenting ourselves as role models and what we're essentially doing to our children?
Yeah, it's such an important question because I feel like a lot of the conversation right now is the kids, they need to regulate themselves. They need to figure it out. You know, it's all them and this. And really, it is this bigger picture of it's us.
Yes.
And if there's one thing I've learned through data that seems very clear, it's that a parent's use of technology directly impacts their child's use of technology, i.e. if you're a heavy user of technology and spending lots of time on your phone, your child is more likely to do the same. And the data also shows that this idea of parental technoference, so that is this concept where a device is coming in between you and your child's interaction. So it could be a number of things. It could be the newborn baby that you miss a feeding cue, or you know, they've wet their diaper, you've missed the cue because you're on your phone, or you've missed seeing your kid do something awesome at their soccer game because you're on your phone. Any of these kind of interruptions in your relationship, there is data to say that it actually impacts your child's mental health. It can impact their what we call externalizing behavior, so like outward behavior, violent behavior, that kind of thing. So we really do, you know, if we want to talk the talk, we have to walk the walk. And we have to be mindful of the way that we're using technology, particularly in front of our kids. While also recognizing that we are adults and we use our phones as tools as well. But even just narrating that or saying, you know, I'm doing a grocery order on my phone. Like if you need me, just tap me on the shoulder and I'm done and you've got my attention. It's really important.
So I've had parents debate this a little bit and say, you know, well, I'm working. And, you know, I have to answer that email. And hey, when I was growing up, you know, my parents were working around the clock and, you know, they were busy multitasking and doing all kinds of different things. What is the big deal? What is the big difference between that? What's your thoughts on that? Is there a difference?
So I think there is some validity to that. I mean, certainly like our parents would have read novels or that kind of thing. There's a lot of difference in what we're consuming. So I think our kids are smarter than we realize as well. And they pick up on whether we're mindlessly scrolling videos on our phone versus if we are truly working or answering an email or ordering dishes, food for dinner. And so that's why I think that narration piece is so important. The other part is that I think, you know, years ago, this technology was not so portable. So although you may have been working, it's not the same. Like you're carrying work around in your pocket 24/7.
Yes.
And it can just become so invasive. And you might pick up your phone to send an email for work but then you get distracted by XYZ app on your phone. So I think there may be a little bit of like
Guilty.
There may be, well, me too. There may be a little bit of like forgetting from back then, like just how much time was spent doing those things versus now, where I think it just is so much more pervasive. And another reason why I'm a big fan of like tech-free downtimes within the home. So you may say from 4 to 7, we're all putting our devices away and we're just going to spend time. Maybe you don't have 3 hours. Like, I'm not saying it has to be 3 hours, but doing something as a family, as a routine where your kids get your undivided attention for just a little bit of time.
So the biggest thing that worked in our home was to have a tech-free zone at the dinner table. So at dinner time, you have a meal, you're sharing it together. And I've done so many polls with people around this. When we were growing up, we had dinner at the table. Did you?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so and that didn't matter whether we were fighting as a family, whether myself and my sister were beefing, whatever it was. It was a non-negotiable. When it was dinner time, we all sat together to enjoy that meal.
Yeah.
And, I look forward to how that time may have developed my skills and my ability to communicate. And I think, we keep even in this conversation, we keep going back to that being sort of the main solution is communicate. Be mindful. In a world where we are more connected to our devices than ever before, we are more disconnected to the people under our roof than ever before.
Yeah.
And so I think, that's a small thing that we can do is implement tech-free zones or tech-free times, to your point. Dinner time being, in my mind, one of the simplest.
One of the most important.
And most important.
I'm also a big fan of tech-free car rides.
If love that.
Like not a 3-hour maybe
road trip,
but within the city, like I find even now at 6, that's the only time my kid will really just babble on and talk to me about stuff.
Couldn't agree more.
Right? And I think part of it is they don't have to make direct eye contact with you. They feel more open to just say what's on their mind. But it's also a really great time for them to embrace boredom.
Yeah.
Like the other day, my 3-year-old was in the back and she's like, Mommy, I'm looking at the city. It's so cute. Like, so we don't have devices in the car.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're not there, so they can't ask for them.
You are so bang on about that. And in our house, we call them conversations.
Yes.
So we have conversations all the time.
Love that.
And we recently took my son out of his, his car seat or his booster seat. So now he's sitting just in a regular seat. And the other day I went to go look at him in the rearview mirror and I'm like, I can't see you. So he's, trying to have that eye contact with me in the rearview. Really important comments that you've had so far and suggestions. But, again, I want to get into some of the debates that we have as adults with myself as an expert, and I'm sure you've heard before. So this is a big, juicy question next.
Okay.
Growing up, we watched TV as kids. I did. All day long, Sesame Street, Polka Dot Door.
TGIF.
Yeah, all the things, right? Full House. The Cosby Show. Controversial. But, a lot of parents will say, what is the big deal? What's the big difference between us watching TV, growing up as kids for hours at a time after school or whatever it is, to our kids coming home and, let's say, jumping on YouTube or, playing Roblox. I had a Sega Genesis, for example. Nintendo system. What are the differences between the technology of the past versus the technology of today? And how that is shaping our youth?
Yeah, so there are some big fundamental differences. Since the time of us watching TV, what has changed? One of the things that has really changed is the way that so many of these companies are surveying our data and building a profile of who we are, what we like, in order to feed us content that is specifically for us. So if a child goes on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, whatever the case may be, as soon as they show an interest in something on that platform, they're automatically getting more of that same content to increase their engagement time, bring them in further. So that's one thing. The idea of these curated algorithms is completely different, and it is an addictive type of feature, which wasn't present on TV back in the day. We just watched whatever was on. Another difference would be when we watched TV back in the day, there was commercials. And those commercials didn't know us. They weren't targeted at us. They were whatever was on. We watched them. We got a little bit bored. And then maybe we waited for the show to come back on. Maybe we didn't. But now we have infinite scroll as one addictive feature. So when you're online, Roblox, on YouTube, all these platforms, there's no natural stopping point. So that is holding your attention longer. And the other thing is the commercials that you're fed or the ads are targeted at you and your interests. And that's trying to get you to spend your money and engage longer. I think those are the biggest fundamental things that are different. There's also the other things like the likes and the comments and kind of now we're on these platforms that give us validation, external validation, which you didn't get when you watched Full House.
Right.
So all these features are just made to hold our attention longer. And we can see year over year that kids are spending more and more time on these technologies. And it's by no fault of their own. It's by design.
Right. So I think the big question is, do we just remove it completely? What's the balance?
That's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
So you'll get a lot of opinions about this. I try to stay somewhere in the middle because I'm not anti-tech. I mean, we use technology at home. It is a great tool.
Yes.
There are some people who use technology and that's fine too. But I think the biggest thing is, number one, knowing your child. Again, we just go back to that. Knowing your child, what they can handle. Some kids truly can't handle much technology when they're very little, and that's okay. And they can grow into that, and you can learn about that together and build those regulation skills together. But I don't think it should ever be a situation where you feel like you have to give it because they're going to miss out on a skill or something that they're going to need in the future. We could talk about that later, maybe.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to find a place of moderation where we're thinking about using the technology as a tool, giving them access to certain technology when they're developmentally ready. I don't think it's fair to give certain technologies to a child and expect them to regulate on their own if they're not developmentally ready to hear that messaging and really implement that messaging.
Okay.
And to me, routine is everything. So particularly when your kids are young, if you can get into a good routine where they know what to expect, like in our house, if I gave my 6-year-old free reign of video games or even just here and there access, it would consume him. And I know that about him. But he really wants to play. And so we decided that Sunday nights, we're going to do 30 minutes and you're going to play with daddy and little sister watches. And that's your 30 minutes that you get. And he still gets a little bit ticked when he has to get off of it. But he doesn't ask throughout the rest of the week because it's just a routine. It's a rule. And so I like to tell parents, as much as you can have established routines around technology where your kid knows what to expect. And of course, there's going to be caveats here and there for sick days and things like that. But to me, routine is everything.
So as a parent,
Yeah.
so mom to mom,
Yeah.
I think what I would love to know from you as well, as an expert in your field, do you have favorites that you would introduce or recommend per age group?
Like I'd only be going off of my own experience of things that I've used.
And that's great.
Yeah. So, okay, for example, my 3-year-old really doesn't use an iPad. And I think we just learned that from the first one and we kind of just never gave it to her and she doesn't know any better and doesn't miss it. So we haven't gone there yet with her. We watch Netflix programs that are age appropriate. I think knowing you can use like Common Sense Media is a great resource to go on and check if you think that something is age appropriate for your child.
Common Sense Media.
Common Sense Media.
Okay.
Yep. You can check video games on there, television programs, movies, all of it. We use Osmo Have you ever used
Yes,
Osmo?
I love Osmo.
So we love Osmo because you connect it to an iPad, but it actually uses multiple senses, and we got him a coding package, and so I like that it's open-ended, but they're still using tactile and eyes
building for
and
the
ears,
future.
building for the future. We haven't yet used Minecraft. I think this is the next thing for Jack because he loves to build.
Yep.
And
Then he's gonna love it.
He's going to love it. And
Yeah.
Minecraft can be used in a safe way if you have the parental controls done properly. But that one will have to be one that's very routine because I
Yes.
know that he'll get, also a big fan of like audio players. We have a Yodo. So they can listen to songs, listen to stories. I'd love to hear some of yours though, because we haven't experimented with a lot.
So I actually really like Nintendo as a system.
Yeah.
Again, to your point, I like the ability to use a gaming system on the big screen.
Yeah.
So as a family, we'll have family gaming night.
Yeah.
And, use Mario Kart as a way to like battle each other.
Yep.
Minecraft, big in our family as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we will use the different apps. So YouTube, for example, to look up long format content of something
Same.
that my son is very interested in.
Yeah.
And then, further that with other things.
Yeah.
Creative apps, huge for us.
Yeah.
And, things of that nature. Anything that's sort of like brain building trivia games or things like that.
Yeah.
That's what we use.
Yeah. Danny Go, we like the dancing.
Yeah.
That's a dancing app.
Right. So to your point, I think, knowing what is age appropriate and then
Yeah.
following those guidelines are, a great way to sort of start.
Yeah. And knowing the pitfalls.
Well, that's it. And so that's where I want to go next is
Okay.
that a lot of parents will say, well, I have the parental controls on and it is considered safe.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on parental controls?
Yeah.
I know you've written about this, so I want to know your thoughts.
When I think about parental controls as a general thing, I like to explain to parents, I feel like they should be thought of as a layer of protection. Just the same way that you would put water wings on your toddler, but then you wouldn't leave the toddler in the pool alone. So they're a layer of protection, but they shouldn't be a standalone. What we see, actually, there was a really interesting survey that came out of the University of South Florida, and it looked at 11 to 13-year-olds, and it asked a bunch of questions about parental controls. And what it found was that parents who actually used a lot of parental controls, their kids actually ended up spending more time per day online than kids whose parents didn't, which sounds counterintuitive.
It does.
And they postulate that the reason for this is because, and it makes sense to me, you set all the controls and you're like, oh, they're good. So now I don't have to keep an eye on them. And maybe I forget kind of how much time they've spent on them because they're safe. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind about parental controls is that they are invariably faulty.
Right.
So there have been lots of investigations by like Wall Street Journal, all these different people who have looked into, Roblox parental controls or Snapchat, things like this. And
Right.
you could do the very best you could given the tools that you're given, and your kid is still being exposed to predators online or inappropriate content. I actually think the YouTube Kids parental controls are pretty good.
Okay.
Because YouTube Kids, unlike, let's say, Roblox, this would be great if Roblox would do this, is you can create a safe list of programs that your kid can use, and that's all that they can watch. So they can't go down rabbit holes and click around and get into different things.
And so your thoughts, the difference between YouTube long form content and just regular YouTube and YouTube Shorts.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts with that?
I don't love any short form content for
Same.
kids. Yeah.
And why?
It's too engaging. It's too addictive. And the impact that it has on their attention span so quickly, I think this is a lot of the reason why teachers are struggling to teach and kids are struggling to stay motivated in school, is because it's very difficult to listen to an hour-long lesson. And the teachers are saying, I can't do cartwheels at the front of the class to keep their attention because they're so used to just watching that really short form content.
Really, really interesting correlation between, just short content and then the focus piece.
Yes.
Are we able to focus?
Yes.
Last thing, and just your overall advice, how do we set healthy boundaries and have those healthy conversations as we go along and as technology advances in our digital age? As a parent, what is your biggest 3 tips, for example?
Okay. 3 tips. This is not a tip, but this is just to say that it is difficult. And it's okay for it to be difficult. I think we need to expect that it's going to be difficult because it's a kid's job to push boundaries, and it's a kid's job to want to partake in really engaging technology that they see their friends engaging in. They want it, and that's not their fault. So number one, just knowing that it's going to be a difficult conversation and it may be difficult to hold those boundaries. Number 2, what I would say is explaining your rationale and really getting on your kid's level and helping them to understand what your concerns are. It's actually meaningful. And there is data to suggest that it is actually meaningful, and that parents who monitor their kids online and place parental controls in a way that they foster a back and forth conversation and foster some of that compromise, those kids are actually less likely to sneak around and create fake accounts and things like that. And then the other tip that I would have is that if you're in a place where things have kind of gone astray and you're not sure what to do and you're worried. I see a lot of parents who automatically will throw their hands up and they won't want to make any changes because they're scared of how their kid's going to react.
Right.
All the time. And I try to say it's okay for them to have a reaction. Like it's okay for them to be upset. As their parent, it's still our job to step into our parental authority and be their frontal lobe that they just don't have right now.
Yeah.
And make those decisions. And I think if we look at, again, those Gen Z, those early 20s, they're all telling us we had too much technology. This was a problem. We need to change things.
Yes.
And so to me, it's like giving our child a gift with that moderation.
Exactly that. And what a great way to end on that very, very hopeful note. Alison, I could literally sit here and talk to you all day. And that being said, we have to have you back.
Yeah,
So please come back. Your
Yeah.
insight was so, so valuable. Before we end, where can we find you? I know where to find you, but where can our viewers find you?
So I have an Instagram account. It's called The Smartphone Effect MD. And I have a Substack account that's called The Smartphone Effect.
And I also want to say that your emails are also incredible. So
thank you.
Make sure everybody subscribe to Dr. Alison Yeung. Thank you again so much. And thank you to watching another episode of the Health Tech Up. We will be back again for more incredible conversation.